Welcome. My name's Stephen Marino. As a faculty member here at St. Francis College and the editor of the Arthur Miller Journal, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our special commemoration of Arthur Miller's birth here in New York City in 1915. It's wonderful to see so many Arthur Miller Society members, students, thank you, members of the community, and colleagues. The Miller Society always loves holding events here at St. Francis College because, as many of you know, Miller lived right here in Brooklyn Heights. He moved into the neighborhood as an aspiring writer in 1940 and left in 1956 as one of America's celebrated playwrights. The last few weeks have been quite active in Miller world. The Arena Theater in D.C. is producing The Price, featuring Hal Linden as Gregory Solomon. Ivo Van Hove's production of A View from the Bridge is playing at the Goodman in Chicago, and Death of a Salesman has been playing at Ford's Theater in D.C. And last week, Rebecca Miller's film about her father, Arthur Miller, writer, premiered at the New York Film Festival. And this week, the fall issue of the Arthur Miller Journal was published and features a special symposium on the recent Broadway revival, which featured our special guest today, Jessica Hecht. We here at St. Francis College, I would particularly like to thank the leadership of the college for its undying support of the Miller Society. In particular, I'd like to single out Rob Olivier and his assistant David, the Director of Public Events, and Rich Relkin, our Director of Media Relations. They never say no to me for some reason. So it's my pleasure to introduce the president of the Arthur Miller Society, the tireless David Palmer.
First, I want to thank you all for coming and welcome you to this event. I want to thank Steve and Janet Balakian especially for really being the main drivers of putting this together. And I want to extend a very sincere appreciation to Jessica for making time to join us and share her ideas with us. I also want to thank Sue Abbotson for making the trip from Providence to be with us. She's a real mainstay of the society. Let me just quickly review some of the recent Miller publications. Steve, this is now the 12th year that Steve's been the main driver of the Arthur Miller Journal. The new edition is out, and as Steve said, there are reviews in here, among other articles, one of which is Steve's own, which is a practice he almost never pursues, never publishes his own stuff. But there's a very interesting article on tragedy and the absurd in here, plus a set of reviews of the production of The Price that Jessica was in. Then last July, Steve published an anthology with Cambridge scholars. It's Arthur Miller's Century, and this is a collection of essays that came out of the Centennial Conference that Steve organized here at St. Francis in honor of Miller, the centennial of Miller's birth. There are a number of essays in there from various society members. Brenda Murphy, who's been a mainstay of this society, is the co-editor of a monumental eight-volume survey of U.S. drama. It'll be published by Bloomsbury, I believe, in January or February. Sue actually edited it's a decades series. It's called Decades of Modern American Drama, and Sue did the one on the 1950s. And I think Steve has an essay.
Yours is in the 40s one.
It's in the 40s one, okay. But that's certainly a major survey of American drama. I have an anthology coming out from Bloomsbury in February, Visions of Tragedy in Modern American Drama from O'Neill to the 21st Century. And as you'll see, I only get by with a little help from my friends. Steve did the essay for that on Arthur Miller. Sue did the essay on Tennessee Williams. Brenda wrote on David Mamet. I wrote on Marcia Norman. And I guess we can count Jackson Breyer as a kind of fellow traveler. Jackson did the essay on Thornton Wilder. And Chris Bigsby very graciously did the foreword. And then Palgrave has accepted the Society's proposal for an anthology on Arthur Miller as part of their series, American Literature Readings in the 21st Century, which is edited by Linda Wagner Martin at the University of North Carolina. And that proposal has been accepted. We're moving towards first drafts for the essays on that. There'll be 23 essays. with a good mix of scholars from both established scholars and then some younger scholars from Brazil, Britain, India, Italy, and Spain. In addition to U.S. scholars, there'll be an essay on Miller in China. So one of the things this anthology shows is the breadth of Miller's reach, the appreciation for Miller around the world. We're also pursuing an anthology on Miller in the 1960s with Lexington Books, which is the academic imprint of Rowman and Littlefield. That's not as far along as the others. It'll probably be a smaller volume, 6 to 10 essays perhaps, but that should come together. The final details of that should come together in the next month or so from Lexington. Then there's some upcoming conferences. Unfortunately, I was unable to get a proposal together to get into the Modern Language Association meeting, but that is in New York this year. And it's a major meeting, and those of you that are members or can pay the day fee, it's always an interesting conference to attend. The Comparative Drama Conference is coming up in Orlando, April 5 to 7. And they also, a local theater there, Mad Cow Theater, is doing a production of View from the Bridge. So we'll probably try to have a panel that, a roundtable discussion of that, and then another set of papers for that conference. And any of you that want to submit papers for that, I encourage you, if you, just look on the website that Sue runs, the Arthur Miller Society website, submit a paper proposal. We'll try to put those together into panels for that conference in April. And then the American Literature Association meeting will be in San Francisco over Memorial Day weekend, and we'll hope to have at least one, if not two, different panels there. There are also a variety of regional literary association meetings, the Northeast Modern Language Association, the Rocky Mountain Modern Language Association, and going forward, what we hope to do is have more Miller panels at these regional venues as a way of encouraging graduate students and younger scholars to become more involved in Miller's studies. So that's sort of what's happening with publications and conferences. There is a lot, in fact, going on. Let me now introduce Sue Abbotson, who will be our first speaker. And let me just start with the formal part. Dr. Susan C.W. Abbotson is a professor at Rhode Island College, where she specializes in modern and contemporary drama in the English department. She has authored several books, including Critical Companion to Arthur Miller, Masterpieces of 20th Century American Drama, Thematic Guide to Modern Drama, and the forthcoming Modern American Drama Playwriting in the 1950s, which is part of this Bloomsbury Decades series on American theater, as well as a major article on Arthur Miller in the online Oxford Research Encyclopedia of Literature that was published in December. She's also published on Tennessee Williams, Thornton Wilder, Sam Shepard, Eugene O'Neill, August Wilson, Mae West, and Arthur Miller. And she's a past president of the Arthur Miller Society and the performance review editor currently of the Arthur Miller Journal. So it's clear that, through patience and remarkable diligence, Sue is really emerging as a major theater scholar in America. And beyond that, she is stunningly generous with other scholars. She's been a major guide and advisor to me and with enthusiastic support on a number of projects, and has helped me both launch them and then when I've submitted reviews to the journal, been very good at helping me edit things so that they're clearer. So I'm grateful that Sue could find the time to be with us today and join us from Providence. So with that, let me introduce Sue Abbotson.
Still my speech. Okay. Founded back in 1995, I happily admit that I am a long-time member of the Arthur Miller Society, which in some ways, like Alcoholics Anonymous, only hopefully coming from a more positive place, is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may help promote that common obsession with Miller's work and help others to discover his awesomeness. Hi, my name is Sue Abbotson, and I'm a Miller fan who has driven all the way from Rhode Island to wish her favorite playwright happy birthday, October 17th. We gather today to celebrate the life and work of a truly great playwright, one who, in my opinion, has come to represent the heart and soul of American drama. In a writing career that lasted for 6 decades, although his biggest dramatic successes were in the 40s and 50s, Arthur Miller continues to influence American drama well into the 21st century and is clearly still an important part of the current zeitgeist. I keep a Google alert on his name to try and trace productions of his plays, and I get a string of these every day without fail. However, many of these end up referring me not to people citing him for reasons, or rather they refer me to reasons other than they're putting on a production of one of his plays. Sometimes they are quoting him on how a good newspaper is a nation talking to itself, or using a line from one of his plays, or making references to the now firmly iconic lowly American everyman Willie Loman, or that grafting and dangerously lovable capitalist Joe Keller, or simply mentioning how greatly they felt influenced by his work. There are a whole slew of new creations quite literally inspired by Miller's drama, from the 2 early opera versions of The Crucible and Another View from a Bridge, to the more recent Abigail 1702, a sequel to The Crucible, or 8 Abigails, a dance piece, an abstract piece of choreography exploring the character's complexity. There's also a complete ballet based on The Crucible. And there's Colin Towns Mass Orchestra's 20-minute jazz piece based on the play. The movie Blame, where a teacher assigns The Crucible to a class and events start to parallel the play. Or the play Kingdom City, that explores the controversy behind a production of The Crucible at an ultra-conservative high school. And it's not only The Crucible that inspires, although that is his most produced play. There is the crazed director in Charlie Kaufman's Synecdoche, New York, who begins the play with a nutty production of The Salesman, and a whole episode of The Simpsons based on the play. This Great Country, a shortened version set in the present by Brooklyn-based 600 highwaymen, was performed in what used to be an express clothing store in the Pier 17 shopping mall. Or there's the recent Iranian film Salesman, with the acting couple playing out a version of the play in their own lives, and these are just a few examples. Miller's lifelong commitment to theatrical experimentation has been highly impactful on theatre practitioners in terms of both subject matter and staging, especially as the strength of his plays has attracted some of the best directors and actors around the globe to interpret his work. The wonderful Jessica Hecht has appeared in 3 of his plays on Broadway, After the Fall, A View from the Bridge, and just recently The Price, all of which I had the fortune to catch. And I'm still looking forward to hearing her speak about these experiences. So, it seems just when we think we have seen the ultimate production of one of his works, directors such as Terry Kinney and Eva Van Hove bring us new and exciting visions that open up whole new possibilities. The bones of Miller's plays are clearly strong enough to sustain all kinds of experimentation and to continue to attract appreciative audiences. Miller's perceived role as the voice of American morality has profoundly affected America's vision of herself and continues to have strong socio-political significance as events seem to stir up new relevance in his plays, and this ensures continual productions of his work. Now, I maintain a record of productions of Miller's plays for the Arthur Miller Society website. And rather than slump after his death in 2005, it just keeps getting bigger each year. And please check it out sometime. I get very sad when no one visits the website. We have a brand new site that you can find us at arthurmillersociety.net. And while you're online, check out our Facebook page as well. We have a Facebook page. And please like it and leave a comment. The more likes we get, the better. All right. Sorry about the shameless plugs. While this past year, Miller only made 6th place on America Theatre's list of playwrights being produced in the country, he was actually 3rd last year. And this is because I think they don't count the numerous high school, college, and community theatre productions, of which there are veritable tons. My own children have been able to perform in 2 totally different high school productions of The Crucible, in Miller's version of Enemy of the People, and my son is directing a production of A View from a Bridge this winter. If you look at the lengthy list of licenses that the DPS grants to produce his plays each year, you can see that here is a playwright who matters. And this is also because Miller wrote about things that matter, on both a microcosmic and a macrocosmic scale. He wrote about families and the societies of which they are a part. While his characters resonate as unique individuals, often because he based them on actual people he'd met, he never presented them disconnected from the ongoing society to which they are inextricably bound. He dove to the heart of human nature in its horror and glory, its aptitude for love and sacrifice, its capacity for denial and betrayal, its comedy and its tragedy, although he's too often only credited with the latter. He wrote about the full experience of being human, which makes his work both universal and timeless. While the big four, Death of a Salesman, The Crucible, View from a Bridge, and All My Sons, continue to dominate in terms of production, Miller wrote over 24 plays, and partly through a growing interest in his work, others are beginning to get more attention. While The Price has now been seen on Broadway 5 times, which is as often as Death of a Salesman and A View from a Bridge, it is not yet as popular on the amateur circuit for some reason, despite having only 4 roles. Although the more recent Broken Glass seems to be growing in popularity and now appears on British exam lists, Miller has long lodged on those. Indeed, that's where I actually first came across his work when I was teaching O-level English in Birmingham, England. Penguin, even in England, actually published a special volume that combines All My Sons and A View from a Bridge in one book, because those plays are both often on the O or the A level at the same time. It's good to see the LA Theatre Works have now done audio recordings of 10 of his plays, The Usual 4 plus The Price, The Man Who Had All the Luck, Incident at Vichy, The Ride Down Mount Morgan, After the Fall, and Broken Glass, as well as a wonderful biographical piece, The Life and Times of Arthur Miller, which has been split into 4 45-minute episodes narrated by Ed Harris. And I'm sorry to have missed the showing of Rebecca Miller's new documentary at the New York Film Festival about her father, Arthur Miller, writer, which will hopefully be available in the spring on HBO. I personally love to see more attention given to his later comedies, which I think have been neglected as people are uncertain as to how to approach Miller as a comic writer. He doesn't have the witty repartee of a Tom Stoppard, but more the farce of an early Neil Simon, which feels wrong maybe for such a serious writer. But the pieces are intended to be both satirical and broadly funny, and have fared poorly in production, I think, due to a frequent reluctance to present them in this way. But I saw one production of The Creation of the World and Other Business, his comic take on the Book of Genesis, that had the audience literally roaring with laughter. And I suspect that other plays like Resurrection Blues, The Ride Down Mount Morgan, A Memory of Two Mondays, and Finishing the Picture would do better with a lighter touch. And whatever happened to those full-length film versions that were made of A Ride Down Mount Morgan and The Man Who Had All the Luck? They were completed and then just shelved, not even a video release. Also, more serious pieces like The Archbishop's Ceiling, The American Clock, and Mr. Peter's Connections feel sadly overlooked, though not altogether untimely in their lessons about the effects of a police state or social inequality and age. There's also the rather strange anomaly that the Brits seem to have more invested in Miller than his home nation. While we certainly threw some great centennial celebrations and theatres around the country mounted a nice variety of productions of Miller's plays, in England they went one better. They tracked down new material to produce, mounting productions of his first ever full-length play, No Villain, that he'd written as a student at the University of Michigan, and also got it published, and one they called The Hook, which was based on a 1951 film script Miller had never been able to produce, which was produced both in the theatre and an audio version for the BBC. And thus his canon continues to grow even after his death. As a playwright, Miller took what he did very seriously and was a highly accomplished craftsman. He built plays just like he built his furniture, solidly. Marrying the earnest social issues of O'Neill's earlier plays to the poetic lyricism of Tennessee Williams and the inventive stage design of Thornton Wilder, Miller created his own unique style. While O'Neill played with genre, Miller tried to invent a new one. He took the earthy, common people he had met in the early work of Clifford Odets and morphed their colorful, colloquial speech against the more refined Southern poetics of Williams to create a poetic dialogue of his own. He often began writing plays out in verse form, only later converting this to apparent prose. Miller was not just writing dialogue, but words to be remembered. His language may not have Williams's imagistic heft, but it contains hundreds of evocative, resonant, memorable lines that have been carefully crafted for maximum effect, ensuring attention must be paid. Mm-hmm. At 6 decades, Miller has one of the longest careers of any playwright, during which time he raised the political temperature of American theater and highlighted the dysfunctional nature of both families and nations. He also shocked the country by marrying an American sex icon, The Owl and the Pussycat Man headline. I'm sure that must have created a different kind of American dream for many males, at least. But seriously, his exploration of the nature of guilt and responsibility continues to speak to the heart of what it means to be human and humane. His never slackening vigilance and outspokenness regarding the ways in which humankind chooses to either betray or trust one another, and he did not let himself off the hook for this, coupled with his constant challenge towards what he viewed as social myths and reductive values, allow his readers and audiences to investigate their own complicity in life and be better aware of the fragile balance that needs to be attained between satisfying the self and being part of a greater whole. Considered by theatre practitioners, and they should know, as one of the most significant writers of the 20th century, and often spoken of in the same breath as Shakespeare. Indeed, he is one of the few writers who have come to be performed by a variety of Shakespeare companies. As Christopher Bixby urges, and after all, no speech on Miller can be complete without his wisdom, Miller's plays serve to define the moral, social, and political realities of 20th and 21st century life. If you've ever read his extended essay, Politics and the Art of Acting, you can see how well he understood his country, and the piece is only marred by it not having been able to skewer the Trump nation that has arisen since Miller's death. You would have been horrified, and I suspect his reaction would have been deliciously satirical. Bixby also points to Miller's insistence that he wrote metaphors rather than plays, and that is why they continue to live on the pulse, constantly reinvented, earthed in new realities. And Dan Sullivan once described Miller as a father figure for American and British theatre artists, who is most notable for his integrity and pursuit of truth. Many of the following generations of playwrights, such as Edward Albee, David Rubb, and Tony Kushner, have directly acknowledged Miller's influence upon them. Kushner best displays his commitment, I think, by taking on the editing, the three volumes of Miller's work for the Library of America. And at Miller's memorial service, Albee famously declared, "Some writers matter and some do not. Some of our most clever writers don't matter. They teach us nothing and they do not render ourselves coherent. Arthur Miller was a writer who mattered a lot." Finally, what is most important about Miller is that his work continues to connect with those sitting in the seats in the theatre. I read a short blog by a student named Rebecca Heath in the student newspaper just last week that closed by saying, "In my humble opinion, there has been no playwright before or since who captures a nation's soul so succinctly, so powerfully. His work demands that audiences examine their lives and priorities with respect to the current cultural climate. Miller's plays represent a black mirror social conscience, one that we are reminded of with each revival and performance." Wish I'd written that. When supposedly disaffected millennials feel the power of his work in this fashion, we can know for sure that Miller continues to be a writer who matters a lot, which is why we are meeting here today to celebrate what would have been his 102nd birthday. Thank you.
But let's turn now to the interview that brings many of us here today. And let me start just by introducing the interviewers first. Janet Balakian is a professor of English at Kean University, where she specializes in drama and teaches a broad range of literature, from Greeks to the present. She has published interviews and essays about Arthur Miller, essays on Tennessee Williams, and the cultural and historical study, Reading the Plays of Wendy Wasserstein. She has written a prize-winning screenplay about mental health, literature, and college students. She also is a friend of Jessica's and had a major role in bringing this interview together. Steve Marino is the founding editor of the Arthur Miller Journal and an adjunct professor of English at St. Francis College. His work on Arthur Miller has appeared in many journals and essay collections. He is the author of a language study of Arthur Miller's plays, The Poetic and the Colloquial, and the editor of the Methuen Critical Student Edition of Miller's A View from the Bridge. His recent book, Essential Criticism, Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman in the Crucible, was published in 2015 by Palgrave Macmillan. A new collection he edited, the book I held up earlier, Arthur Miller's Century, Essays Celebrating the 100th Birthday of America's Great Playwright, was published in summer 2017 by Cambridge Scholars. Steve has conducted many interviews with theater people about Miller, and then published them in the Arthur Miller Journal. He's an old hand at the kind of discussion we'll see here today. It's through Steve that the Miller Society's been able to use the facilities at St. Francis College for so many Miller events. And I'm grateful to Steve for all the work he did in setting up this event, and to St. Francis College for once again hosting us so graciously. Jessica Hecht has a flourishing acting career on TV with major roles in such notable shows as Friends, The Single Guy, and Breaking Bad, and guest appearances on Desperate Housewives, Person of Interest, Law and Order, and Madam Secretary. Her film roles include appearances in Sideways, Dan in Real Life, My Soul to Take, and J. Edgar. She has done Shakespeare and Chekhov and is a Broadway regular, having had major roles in Neil Simon's Brighton Beach Memoirs, Mary Chase's Harvey, and playing Goldie in the long-running revival of Fiddler in the Roof in 2015. This past summer, she starred in a revival of Sarah Ruhl's The Clean House, a 2005 Pulitzer Prize finalist at the Williamstown Theater Festival. And I believe this fall at Lincoln Center, you'll be in a new play.
This winter, yeah.
This winter, right, in Lincoln Center. Amid all that, she joins us today because she now has had major roles in 3 Arthur Miller plays. After the Fall in 2004 as Louise, Quentin's ex-wife, in a production directed by Michael Meyer. A View from the Bridge in 2010 as Beatrice, with Liv Schreiber and Scarlett Johansson, directed by Gregory Mosher. And then most recently this spring, The Price as Esther, with Mark Ruffalo, Tony Shalhoub, Danny DeVito, and directed by Kerry Kinney. This gives her a unique perspective on Miller, especially his roles for women and his vision of marriages. And I'm sure this will lead to a lively discussion. I'm very grateful to all 3 of the people on this panel. And let me turn it over to Steve, I guess, to get things started.
Intro? Yeah, you start.
Thank you for joining us today.
Of course.
And we're honored to have you here. So I'd like to sort of start at the beginning. I think the audience likes that because you've had great success in all 3 mediums, TV, film, and stage. So I think people are interested in the beginning. So I'll ask that question. When did you first get the acting bug?
Oh, I wasn't a kid who was dancing around the kitchen wanting to be in a play. I think I started acting really in the end of high school. I became interested, and then when I went ultimately to NYU to drama school there, but for a year and a half I was at Connecticut College in New London, Connecticut, and this incredible actor from the group theater was teaching there, this man named Morris Karnofsky, who taught Shakespeare. And I teach now myself, and I'm always drilling this, into the students that they must know the foundation of American theater is based on the work of the group theater. So this iconic actor, Morris Karnofsky, basically said, "Get out of here. You seem very down, and if you really want to study theater, you should study with Stella Adler and not Lee Strasberg." And it's funny, this connection to Miller, because most people in the group theater believe that Strasberg was responsible for Marilyn's death because they made her too introspective on her own sadness and her own sort of tortured, childhood and life. So, so Morris said, "Go," and my parents wouldn't let me just go to New York and study theater. So I auditioned for NYU, and at that point, Stella Adler was actually teaching in a program there, and I came and studied with her, and that was the start. And I always gravitated to this kind of material. At that time it was the late '80s, so it was very. Actually, Arthur's work was a little bit on the depths at that point, but I profoundly gravitated to this kind of nourishing American.
So you think they grounded you in a principle or a philosophy when you first started?
Yes. Well, that it is of the same aesthetic, and Stella Adler was a very difficult teacher, and her disciples who taught there as well really strongly believed in teaching that theater is an art form, acting is an art form, and you don't just
disciples.
that it's an art form, and you don't just stand there and look pretty, or think that the text is secondary. The text is everything, and so the responsibility of the actor is to understand how the text works to tell this story, and so of course this material is the only way you could possibly stand on your 2 feet and feel like you have something to say.
How does the text work differently, say, when you're in a sitcom, when you're in a film?
That's a
when you're in
great
play?
question. So the text in a sitcom can't hold a lot of weight. So it just can't hold weight at all, really. At all. So it's about rhythm. It's about moving it along and landing the joke and moving it along, because you can't sit in anything. And in film, it's often about the dynamics, the interpersonal dynamics that are not always written about, but the energy that you create with the camera and with each other. And theater is really about the language.
So where do you think you moved from the beginning in acting school to where you are now?
That's a lovely question. I think in my heart, to be very honest, this is what I always wanted to do. I had this idea of being, at that time, you used to be able to do regional theater. It was like the most honorable thing to do would be in a company, was to be in a company like in the Guthrie, or a great company in this country, and you would do these plays, and then perhaps you would do some new plays, but you would do these really rich American plays, and that was my dream. And I was sort of a bit snobby, and I thought I would never go to LA and do trashy. And then I went to LA. I got my first job was doing Midsummer Night's Dream that Julie Taymor directed.
Oh, wow.
And wasn't it really George Wynn's nanny?
My first job, I was George Wynn's nanny. I was a nanny for a little while after school, and then but previous to that, actually, my first equity job was doing Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream. And then after that, I did the Heidi Chronicles.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, and I did that on tour. It had just won the Pulitzer, I think. Yeah, and I did that on tour, and we wound up in Los Angeles at the end of the tour, and from there I started to get television work. And so your idea of what you think you're going to do, then I thought, wow, this is,
To my surprise, a lot of students see you, recognize you for your character on Friends.
Yeah, I find that so
unique.
odd.
You became identified with
yeah, it was such a small part of my work, and I think it's an incredible show. But my participation in it was, the material was slim in my mind, although I do think the show is incredible. Yeah.
So let's turn.
Okay, so you have the distinction of having major roles in 3 of Miller's most well-known plays, After the Fall as Louise, A View from the Bridge as Bee, and then recently The Price as Esther. And so we're interested in hearing about how you approach those characters. And in each you play a wife, but they're very different kinds of wives. So we're interested in your ideas and how you viewed those women.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing for me doing Miller in general is that most people feel quite, well, not everyone, but a lot of people feel quite strongly that he doesn't write for women, and that he has a problem with women, or that the relationships are always in some way representative of women who are not fulfilled and who have no weight in the marriage. And all of these things come up a lot when you're playing those women. Not for yourself, actually, when you're in the play, you don't see it that way, but people come and they express that. And it shocks me, because for 2 reasons. One, because as I said, you don't feel that when you're in it, and especially in a play like A View from the Bridge. She's the strongest one in the room, I think, from my perspective, or at least from what we discussed when we were working on it, and from what you need for the play to work, I think she has to arguably be the strongest one in the
I
room.
need to follow, because I agree with you, because I think Beatrice is central
Yeah.
to understanding the wants and needs of
Sure.
Eddie and Catherine.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And she swallows her pride, and she swallows her, she's not blind to what's happening, but she needs the family to stay together. And I think it's profound how strong she is to not give in to her understanding of what's happening, and because she understands the repercussions. So I completely disagree with people's assumption that she is somehow unable to overcome the obstacles. I think he dies as a result of many things out of her control, but I think she manages the situation in many ways better than anyone
How
else.
how did your sense of her evolve?
Well, that was the hardest
Did
play.
Gregory Moshe help you?
Gregory was incredible. Greg was incredible. That was the hardest play I ever rehearsed. It was a very contentious rehearsal experience. Yeah, but that happens quite a lot in Miller. It's interesting. I think that it is very, very difficult to play a Miller hero, and because it brings up for men playing those roles a tremendous amount of sadness and anger, and
Liev Schreiber is a force.
he's a force. He's incredible, and he was incredible to act with on stage. But it brings up a feeling of outrage that things aren't the way they should be,
Right.
both in your own, like as you're working on the play, the little microcosm of this world that you're creating, things there's so many obstacles coming at you, and so you get really frustrated as an actor that you don't have a path that's clear. And I think it also brings up a lot of frustration in the actors who go for it emotionally, which Liev certainly does, and it's really hard. So I think I segued from your question of what these women were like to play, but I do think Beatrice is incredibly strong. When I did After the Fall, Arthur was there in rehearsal, so that was
I was
really
going to ask you that
easy.
because he was here in April 2004, and that show was in the summer, and he was getting sick
Yeah,
at that time. So
he was,
So how much
yeah.
input did he give into that production? Because sometimes he had a strong hand.
Yeah.
Sometimes he didn't.
Yeah, I had that. It was interesting. He was there. He came several times and watched rehearsal, and my experience of him was extraordinary because, of course, you read his material and or you read his biography, or you just know what you know by being in the theater, and you assume that he's that he's a person with a lot of very complex things to say in person as well, and that he would be somehow larger than life, or I don't know what I expected. He was so there was like three things that I think I got immediately. That he's so accessible emotionally, and really like meat and potatoes in the way he describes what's going on in such a profoundly simple way that it overwhelms you. It overwhelms you because when you're doing a play, your attempt to get at what is in the heart of the material is sometimes much more complicated than it actually is. You make it like so complex. And he would say something really straightforward and really piercing that I found just arresting. So like for example, I'll give you two examples. One I didn't experience, but Greg Mosher related to us when we were working on a part of View from the Bridge that was very hard. He related a great story in which there was a piece of text that was very difficult for several actors working on, and Arthur was there at that rehearsal, and they kept talking about this moment and this. It was actually, I think, after the fall, and this moment that was really baffling this actor, and they looked to Arthur and they asked for his help, and Arthur said to the person playing Quentin, I guess, he said to him, "Do you love your wife?" And the guy said, "Yeah." And he said, "Did you ever want to kill her?" Which was like, for anyone that's been married, yeah. But I mean, it's not, but it's that like, yeah, of course you know what that is. I'm sure I'm bastardizing the moment as it exactly was, but he did the same thing for us when we were doing After the Fall, in terms of talking about the frustration and that it's not complicated. It's that, you know, he said to me, it's not complicated in that scene, one of the first scenes with Louise. You made dinner, and he's really late, and you really tried, and you're really pissed off. You made this beautiful dinner, and where is he? Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, okay, I can understand that. Yeah.
I'm always interested in commenting on that play. I mean, the play's always accused of being autobiographical.
He denied
so you're
that,
playing,
yeah,
I mean,
Mary.
you're playing Mary. In a sense.
Yeah, he denied it. We had a lot of books around about Marilyn. I remember in the green room, he didn't like that. Yeah. Well, he denied that it was autobiographical at that moment in his life. He didn't want that. When you watch the documentary, you realize that it is still very, very painful. It was very painful for him his whole life to be with somebody who was so unwell that he couldn't help.
But the fact that you were playing his first wife, that informed the way you saw Louise, or did you separate that?
There's not that much written on her in Time Bends, and so I do feel that I really just, and I myself at that point had young kids and had been married, you know, like I don't know, probably 10 years, and I knew myself instinctively what he was talking about. So yeah, I think I played into what he was, I tried to focus on what he was telling me, which was like, you know, there was a naivete to that character. There was a lack, they were all in analysis, but there was a lack of connection. They were just like basically evolving out of the relationship, and they were really frustrated with each other that they couldn't be there for each other, and there was all this analysis trying to get them to be self-possessed, and it was like, so basically with that character, I remember thinking, like, when you have a little bit of information about yourself, you try to kind of start using it, you know, and the scenes, each scene provided a different kind of ammunition for that interpersonal fight, and that's what and the last play, I just wanted to say, really proved to me that he did write for women. And interestingly enough, I don't read reviews and I don't know people's criticism of the price, but I do gather that people historically say that Esther is underwritten and that he didn't understand. You know, he didn't really write for her, and I completely disagree. And I feel, I completely disagree.
The general consensus about you, since we're skipping to the price now.
Yeah.
Here's the question we have. Your version of the price of Esther is very different than any one of the previous four.
Yeah.
Certainly a different relationship between Esther and Victor.
Yeah.
Okay? It's much less hostile.
Yeah.
Much less doubting and more loving. And Sue Abbotson in her review called you the sexiest Esther ever.
Oh, well, first of all, it's Mark Ruffalo. Hello. Like, would you not be out for that?
So I want to know how you all came with Terry Kinney to that, the way you played that so differently than ever done before.
First of all, it's totally in the writing. I completely, if you read that play, there is nothing, so you can look at his other plays and assume that the women are all disappointed in their husbands. And this very familiar thing comes up when you're working on a Miller play, which I find just like outrageous, which is that at some point with his plays, they say, they seem so angry with each other. They're clearly not having sex. They're clearly, and you're sort of like, and where do you get that? Why? Because you're reflecting on one basic kind of dynamic where the wife is angry and then they have this loveless dynamic or this. I think that Esther, the whole play is about her feeling like we're so close to actually having a second chapter of our life. There's nothing in the text that would make me think otherwise. And she is so hoping for that, and she's exploding with this hope. And then then you know, like Walter comes back, and it makes her feel young again because they had this,
this
you know, this
opportunity.
and so it's like I feel that they are poised to have some sort of hope in the relationship. And I don't think in the relationship, I don't think there is anything in the text which does not support that. I think we take a springboard with this text, and then we start to go into experiences we've had or that other dramas have illuminated. But if you just keep looking at his text, I don't see that. I just don't. Yeah.
So should we go with the Esther questions?
You can go back. No,
with
go
Esther.
back.
Well, no, well, for the price, I'm struck by how the play seems to, or Vic seems to say that Esther was money mad and materialistic, and that drove him to become a cop rather than, well, there's also the issue with the father, but did you feel that way about your character, Esther, that she was interested in money above all, or not?
I think that they had lived in a level of discomfort their whole married lives that had really depressed her at this point. That had, I mean, she was already depressed, but I think it had brought both of them down, that they were never, and I don't think she was money mad in just a kind of reactive way, and she saw what other people wanted and she wanted that too. I think she actually felt that they had such this like low grade, lower middle class, depressed existence that was not necessary, that her husband had, many opportunities, and at that point she felt lost. She felt if they had just something, it would have,
She's very aware of what it looks like on the outside when she says she doesn't want to go out with him to movies in his uniform.
Yeah.
I don't want everybody to know your salary.
Yeah.
She says
Yeah.
that. But in the end of the play,
Yeah.
she allows him to
She
wear
says, "Keep it."
Yeah.
She reconciled at the end.
She loves him. She loves him enormously, and she feels bad that she feels bad, and she feels like she understands, I think, by the end of the play, that what he did was out of a sense of honor for his father, despite how difficult the father was. At the end, his impulse to just take care of him, despite the fact that he was a bastard and he lived in this elegance without, overwhelmed her, I think, emotionally, with a love for him that she had, that she couldn't.
So does she believe Vic's story, or she believes Vic's story and not Walter's story, because there is that candy?
No, she gets Walter's story. She definitely gets Walter's story, and it's devastating to her. But she, I think she walks away with the sense that on an emotional level, her husband was a really, really good man.
Person.
Yeah, and I think that is, that his honorability as a human being is what she walks away with, and that's incredibly powerful. Yeah. It is, talk about moral. I mean, they're pretty, yeah.
It's a beautiful play.
Yeah.
Now, do you see at the end of the play a resolution of conflict between the two brothers? I mean, they separate.
Yeah, I see. It's very difficult, that play. That play also was very difficult to rehearse. The thing that happens with that play, so at the beginning Arthur writes that one should not be able to side with one brother over the other. And I think when playing Walter, the difficulty is that you don't feel good about yourself. And for some reason, his words in the mouth of grown men brings them to such sort of difficult feelings about who they are. Yeah. Any great actor saying that over and over again, it's a very complicated relationship they have. And I think people playing Walter genuinely struggle with how to make him virtuous. It's hard. Yeah. It's very hard.
The way Tony Shalhoub does it, like, it almost was ungenuine when he's, at least what I saw, when he's telling about his breakdown, and he sort of tries to manipulate.
Yeah, he's playing on his.
And that was his version of it.
He was
Did
playing
they talk
that.
about that in
No.
Because I'm not sure if he was playing Walter, Victor, is he playing?
Yeah,
you?
playing all of us to feel pity for
yeah.
him. Yeah, it was very difficult. That was a very difficult scene, and the thing with the thing I must say with that play, because it is so verbose, and there are these, you look down and you realize someone is telling their life story, and I think the way it's designed, you have to try to negotiate, like in the plus column, you have to get empathy, right? You have to get empathy from that story, and the real difficulty is that it is explaining a breakdown, and then it is asking for pity, and I feel like it's almost difficult. The most arduous thing about it is to allow it to speak for itself. It sort of has to come, I feel like it has to be in dialogue with the other two characters, because it's so much text. And that was a section where I think Tony grappled a lot with whether we were believing him and whether we understood how painful it was for him. And he needed to dredge up a tremendous amount of emotion to get through that. And his choice was to play it that he was just holding it together. And I don't know how it seemed to other people. It's a tremendous task to make that character likable.
But when he reveals that Victor knew his father had money.
Then you totally get it. You
So
totally get it.
do you, as
You
Esther,
totally-
flip to his side at all?
I don't think Esther flipped to his side. No, I don't think she flips to Walter's side. I think she just becomes outraged with Victor. Do you know you know what I mean? The distinction that she just feels outraged with Victor, but Walter at that point is not even part of the equation.
Your version, what struck me when you talk about the power of the women in the play, and I've seen that play like 3, 4, 5 times, and you say, you provoke the final comment, you say, ask him about the $500.
Yeah,
That would have never gotten spoken if your character didn't do that.
Yeah.
So she does
Yeah.
want to see a sort of resolution.
She does. She wants a resolution because it's what I said about her sexuality and about her marriage and about her relationship to it all. She feels that if we get through this, if we come clean, if there's some kind of honesty, then we can move past it. And then isn't that what Miller is dealing with in most of his conflicts?
Sure.
It's like the truth will set us free. Isn't that what it is? The truth will set us free. And then I don't think that happens. So look at all the 3 plays we're talking about. The truth doesn't set, the hero does not become free.
Let's go back to View from the Bridge for a minute. What about what Beatrice finally says to Eddie?
Yeah.
You want something
Yeah,
else, and
you
you
can
never
have it. Yeah, yes.
She says it at the end.
Right, the truth, well, so the truth will set us free. It sets the action of the play free, but it doesn't liberate the characters into a utopic state.
Right.
But yeah, that is amazing. She finally, that's
she
why
finally
I say
says it.
she's the only one who can stand
Yeah.
the truth. So there you go. That's
Right.
why she's the strongest person
Huh.
in the room.
So,
know.
but what do you make, do you see them a sort of reconciliation between them at the end? I mean, he
Between-
starts in my D. He says my D.
Oh
fine.
yeah.
My B.
Yeah.
My D.
Yeah, I do see. It was hard because I didn't know, it's so interesting in that production, sort of scared of him at the end. Not for my safety, but just scared of everything that his character held.
She can't, I think you just don't understand him, the things that he does.
She becomes another
Yeah,
person.
yeah.
He becomes another person to
agree.
her at the end. So your impulse when he says my B might be to embrace him or to do something physical. And I remember feeling like it's so much more complicated because as opposed to The Price, where at the end of the play she gets back the man she always
Right.
loved. This
Right.
person she fell in love with is there for her. In View from the Bridge, the person she loves
It's not there.
Yeah.
And this person that's lying there dying at her feet is not the man she married. No.
Well, it's hard to explain so many of his actions in the
Yeah.
play. Jan, I remember we were at a conference a couple of years ago, I gave a paper on A View from the Bridge. So Jan asks the question, so Steve, what about the kisses? He said, on whom? You know, when Eddie kisses Catherine, we're
Yeah.
shocked.
Yeah.
And then when he kisses Rodolfo, we're shocked too.
Yeah.
That emasculation of Rodolfo is just so fascinating.
Yeah.
In the play as to why he's doing it for so many complex reasons.
Yeah.
So how do you think your Beatrice saw that?
Well, I think that, saw those kisses, you mean? Yeah. I think, you know, to be honest, I equate it to this kind of mindset that people have when they can't actually process something that's beyond their
Comprehension.
well, emotional comprehension. For instance, if I think people that are raised very in a very religious manner or in a very sort of rigid manner, the idea of, for someone who's been raised very Catholic, the idea of abortion or homosexuality, even though they're emotionally like a very open person, is something they just can't, they can't go there. They can't go there. And I think that her inability to, I mean, she knows and she says it, but she can't actually go there. Yeah, that's what I would equate it to. Yeah.
Yeah, how do you approach playing a Sicilian American, an ethnic character like Beatrice?
Well, my
'Cause she was-
mother-in-law was Italian from Italy, and
So
I
they-
approached it that way. She was the most loving person, but there were certain things that she just couldn't. She could acknowledge that she understood what that was. I understand that those, whatever it was that I found completely easy to embrace. Okay, I understand that those two men love each other and that they have sex or whatever, but I don't even want to talk about it. I don't want to even think about it. I know what that is, but I don't want to go beyond, okay, that's not, whatever, that's not something that I can even allow myself to think more about, or anything that is out of yours. So that kind of stuff, that family was most important, and what you were raised with was most important, was something I tried to gravitate to. You guys had a really interesting question about immigration too.
Oh, that was my question about,
that plays
did you
the-
see any echoes with the Trump's immigration policy?
Oh, yeah, I thought about that, but
Because it is a play about he
he
informs.
informs, but
With the millionaire, or-
he invites them in.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a problem. He wants to help. Well, they're his wife's own. They're his own. They're Italian, and he wants to help them, even though they're immigrants. He wants to help them. It's really the situation with Catherine that taints his feelings. I don't think he has an innate sense of alienation from people. It's complicated. I mean, they're Italian. They're his own. So it would be the equivalent of saying, of you having Armenians come who are exiled, or if like if it's your own nationality, or if you were, Syrian, it's your own nationality that you're accepting in. So I don't know. I think it is based on this tainting of anything foreign because it takes Catherine away from him. They cast a
that's
spell.
what it seems to be.
Yeah. It's interesting. It would be very interesting to try to spin it another way. I think it would be possible. Yeah.
And you played other wives too in other plays, in the assembled parties,
Yeah.
and Golden Fiddlers. How do you see your connection to all these wives that you?
Yeah, I play a lot of wives where the husband is having trouble with being together. I think playwrights love to I think playwrights are fascinated with that. And I'll be very honest, I love doing The Price because I think he actually loves his wife. I don't think, and I would ask anyone who really knows that play to try to sway me otherwise. I don't think Victor wants out of the marriage.
No, I
I don't see
never
that
thought
at
so.
all. I think he's really wants to be with his wife. And I have to say, I did a lot of plays for a spell where the husband was not available, and it's depressing after a while. No, a lot of great dramas. I was thinking about it because I did I did Julius Caesar, then After the Fall, then A View from the Bridge, then assembled parties. You can string them all together, and in all those plays, the husband is not available to his wife, and I found the price was very refreshing in that way.
So what do you think Miller is saying about marriage from the 3 plays that you did?
Well, I think he sees our separateness, which of course is alluded to in all those essays he writes, that we're separate. And I think that his relationship with Inga in watching that documentary is very powerful.
Very close relationship.
Very close, but she makes this comment about marriage that only a really self-realized European person could make, which is that maybe it's forever, maybe it's not. She says, I don't know. I don't think I don't believe in that. I didn't believe in that when I stepped into it, and I don't believe in it. It is what it is. And I thought she was so great in saying that because it gives you so much freedom. And I felt their individuality was so enhanced by the other person. I loved that. I loved that. So they got married in 62 or 62. So I'm trying to think of which play. So that was After the Fall. And that was all about analysis and self-reflection. So I can't say that play was based on his experience with her yet, but then the price in which they both had this artistic potential and it was thwarted. I mean, she had this potential as a poet, and he had all this potential as a scientist, which I think is also at that point in time was a very creative endeavor. It was like the height of physicists being really cool and all of that. So,
which is your favorite Miller role that you played?
That I've played?
And which ones do you want to do?
I would love to do Broken Glass and All My Sons. I would like to do both of those plays. And I would like to do Death of a Salesman at some point, but I must say, I think Kate Reed was incredible in that part, and I sometimes listen to her. There's some recordings of her doing Linda that I think for anybody who is interested in acting, she is there's this expression in acting where you just go through the center of the line. There's nothing extra. You're just really on the line. It's this expression, play on the line. That is actually what I think part of what people's problem with the price might have been at times when there was all this dialogue. If you don't play, does that make sense? Do you play through the line? It's just all the person is saying is what's needed to be said. There's nothing extra that needs to be added. It's not that there's not subtext, but it's like you're just moving the text through because it's so clear emotionally.
Kate Reed played us during the original production.
She did, and but she also played, I think in the original, she might have played it a little more alcoholic too, which is interesting.
Yeah, yours was it's downplayed. In
I
the production.
downplayed that, yeah. But she was very functional, yeah. But I think Kate Reed was one of the most extraordinary actresses for Miller's work because she was very simple. Very simple.
I was saying that I could see you playing Fania Fenelon and playing for
Oh
Tony.
yeah, I have to look at the play of that.
So why Miller's women as opposed to you're gravitating to Miller
as opposed to Williams
as opposed to any other playwright?
Yeah, I think it's my incredible luck that I've been able to do 3 of his plays. Is so lucky, and I think that informs everything when you get to.
Well, so do you let your agent know I'm looking for a Miller play, or do they come to you?
No, the first time I met him, we did a reading of After the Fall with Liev, actually, in probably 2002 with Hilary Swank.
Wow.
Playing Maggie, and she wanted to do a play, and then it didn't work. They didn't think it was going to fly with her. And I can't even remember why. But Arthur wanted to do it again, And then about 2 years later, they said, let's try again, and they just offered me that, and they used Peter Krause because he was at the height of his
I took students to
60.
see that.
Oh
actually.
yeah. So then we did it then, and I think it's with Rebecca. Once you get sort of the okay, she can play these. Rebecca still holds the estate, so she has to approve. And then after that, after the fall, I mean, A View from the Bridge was very interesting. I was doing the Arthur Miller, the Neil Simon plays. I was doing a production of Neil Simon's Brighton Beach Memoirs and Biloxi Blues, and they closed very quickly. And I had read in the paper that they were doing View from the Bridge with Lee Evans Scarlett, and the rest of the casting would be announced. And literally, we closed completely unexpectedly these Neil Simon plays. And as I was leaving the theater, calling my agent to say they posted a closing notice as we were leaving. We haven't even opened fully, but I just read in the paper that A View from the Bridge is being cast. Could you see if that's cast? I'm obsessed with that play. And he called me back in the morning and he said, yes, they'll meet with you. They're almost cast, but they'll meet with you and you can read with Liev. And I was so... What had happened was I was sort of in this New York 1940s world from the Neil Simon. I just had to switch from Jewish to Italian.
So speaking of these actors that you starred with, now, years ago, I think it was in the late 90s, you gave an interview and you suggested that you were less interested in becoming a star than in working regularly. So now years later, it seems like you have both. You're a star and you're working regularly. But having said that, you've been in a lot of Miller plays with film stars who have their Broadway debuts. And, after the fall, you were with Krause and Carla Gugino. And Scarlett Johansson was in View from the Bridge, and now, of course, Danny DeVito made his Broadway. So what's it like when they come to the stage veterans?
It's complicated.
Yeah.
I am friends with Scarlett, and I admire her profoundly. And so, and Danny and Mark and Tony and I had an incredible experience on The Price, but it was hard. What it is that it was hard only because there was so much to do in such a short time. When you rehearse a play on Broadway now, because of the economics, there's just 4 weeks, not even 4 weeks. It's gone down.
To learn the whole play in 4 weeks?
And it keeps getting less. And Mark was our savior. Mark came in because John Turturro was supposed to do it, and he couldn't at the last minute, and Mark came in and just saved us. But what my experience usually is that understandably the person is needing to have as much sort of structure around their preparation as possible, so that they can learn how to do this play on Broadway, because there's so many parts of doing a play on Broadway that are difficult and are emotionally challenging and are extremely nerve-wracking, that the artistry of Miller and the history of Miller isn't that not enough attention gets paid to that, because we're very focused on getting that person up to speed on just what it is, the mechanicals of doing a play on Broadway. All of those actors were enormously successful because they are so talented. But just for me emotionally, I guess I feel sometimes a little heartsick that we can't all talk more about how Arthur's work, how Arthur's plays really work. They're really unique, and there is another level of moving them along so that people get the emotional resonance that they should, that I always feel short-shrifted with, and I feel like, could everybody please come to the last 4 or 5 shows? Maybe that would.
So last question before we open it up to all. So we in the Miller Society are always interested in what actors and playwrights and directors, how you see the current state of American theater. So your assessment of contemporary Broadway.
Oh, of Broadway.
Yeah.
Um,
And
Well, it doesn't
American
have to be
theater, too.
Broadway.
but just theater?
How about
Just theater.
contemporary theater
Yeah.
in America? America.
You got another half an hour.
I think that the thing about American theater now is a lot of writers, contemporary writers, write in reaction to stuff that's going on, social trends and political trends, and that is the meat of what great playwrights want to write about. But sometimes it's lacking a sort of a basic, like, universal moral story that not all playwrights need to be morality playwrights, but the sort of the microcosm of society that a lot of playwrights are looking at now that are that they find interesting, understandably, is short on linguistic, like, substance. And I think there are a few writers that really dig in terms of, like, the way language works and the way it explores relationships. I was just looking at Susan Laurie Park's 2 plays that were done at the Signature, and I thought they were beautifully done, and those plays were written in the 90s, the late 90s, and I was thinking, God, she's just so rich in language, language that talks about race and language that talks about family and on a really primal level. And I do feel that but that's 20 years ago, and I feel that sometimes the writing is not as the writing of sentences does not allow us to actually hear enough of our desperation to connect, and that's what I relate to when I'm listening to theater, like human interactions. Right. Language is played around with to sort of sort of like get into what, like, the current vernacular is, but we are not getting enough going on emotionally in terms of the way people really communicate.
That's what I was going to ask. What you're looking for in a play is more of that emotional depth.
Yeah. And that's what theater is the language of theater is really interesting to me. I mean, certainly you could say, well, look at Beckett, he's not giving you this, but I'm talking about naturalistic American playwrights. And Beckett was putting together stories that were about our existence, and that's undeniable. Yeah.
Miller wrote a late essay, and he said it's all about the language.
The language. It's about the language that you would leave there and you think, wow, that's a thought that relates to life. I said to Rebecca last week after the documentary, I said, I'm like somewhat observant Jew, and I like to go just because I like to listen to, like, passages about the way people exist in historically in the world and try to grapple with things that are difficult. And I said to Rebecca, I hope you understand what I mean when I say this is like the best part of what religion could give someone, some of his plays, in terms of a sense of what we fight against and a sense of what we all fight against, and like the little parables of a great sermon, that we're all the same, and that we and we're all fighting for some sense of elevation beyond our our struggles.
It makes me think of a lot of my colleagues who say, "Oh, why are you studying Miller? He's so didactic." How do you respond to that? Because a lot of people say that.
Well, listen to how didactic. Oh, I mean, he's wordy because he's trying to
say something.
Say something about issues that are enormous, and I think it's hard to grapple with that.
So let's open it up to questions from David.
Right. Yeah, I'd like to talk about how the production of Christ came together, because it was such a very different, it seems to me, interpretation of Esther and Victor. And so I guess the first general question is, was that a conscious decision that the cast and the director made? The 2 examples I'm thinking of in particular are, there's that line early on in the play when Victor and Esther talking about leaving each other.
Yeah.
And Esther says, "Go, just send me enough money for coffee and cigarettes."
Yeah.
And Victor replies, "Well, why don't you run off with your doctor?"
Yeah.
Right? Well, in your production, you were lying very seductively on the couch, and he was massaging your foot. That was not a fight. That was two people in some way flirting with each other. That's a very different interpretation.
But just think about it. If you were to actually be saying that at the beginning of the play, where would you have to go? Like, and then later in the play, you actually have fights. It struck me, just dramatically speaking, that would be just such a short distance to travel. And if she was actually having an affair, wouldn't it be more interesting to just be like, yeah, that's where I'm going. I'll be back in like 20 minutes, right? Because he's right down the, Because actually there's a piece of text that we didn't use that is in some of the editions. That often there's
We know.
yeah. So in the original, that there's a whole piece of text about the guys that lived downstairs and these girls that were like escorts.
Yes.
And that was like, and Victor says, yeah, exactly. And Victor says, God, I miss those days. Those are the days that people used to have afternoon sex, and they laugh. They both laugh. Now, if that's a couple that is like completely sexless, you wouldn't really be having this conversation in any kind of, and it was like throwaway conversation. So I just found it so much more interesting.
Right. No, it was much more interesting than other productions I've seen. And this, just to follow up on that, Walter's exit. Often, like if you think back, was it the Hallmark Hall of Fame one that Fielder Cook did with George Scott?
Yeah, and Colleen did it.
Right. Yeah. But in that one, clearly, Walter is forced to confront the shame of his moral abandonment and financial abandonment of the family. And in your production, I think Walter, in that production that you cited, Miller wants us to see both brothers.
Yeah.
And the sense I had in your production, when Walter exits, he's not exiting in any kind of shame. He came sincerely to try to he understands his life is lacking.
Yeah.
What Esther and Victor have, this really loving connection. He comes to try to reestablish that with his brother.
Yeah.
He leaves in disappointment.
Yeah.
And so there's a line that I think got cut in your production, from one other text, where basically, as Walter exits, Victor says, maybe he ought not to go into the street that way, because Walter is so upset.
So overwhelmed.
But in your production, that's not the Walter that leaves.
Yeah.
He leaves with his dignity intact.
Yeah.
So were those conscious decisions that you recall, the discussions that were had?
Yeah. We made these small cuts. I think it's the difficulty that you make cuts before you've that line was cut before we actually rehearsed the whole thing.
Oh.
And it's a really interesting point, because wouldn't it be better to rehearse the whole play and then see what actually seems redundant based on your performances? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, Miller and I have to say also Williams is quite similar in this respect. The thing that's easier is that when you're teaching, you're always trying to guide the students toward breaking down the scene with very clear little modules of interaction that you recognize, that you emotionally understand.
A beat.
A beat, yeah. And you'll say, you know what that is. So like Arthur said to me, that's when you made dinner and your husband is late and you're just pissed off and you have nothing to say to him, and you know, that's that beat, right? So in Miller, it actually is quite beautifully carved out, and there is an exchange of dialogue that's usually very clear, you know. I gravitate to that as an example of showing the students how you have to be able to investigate the text for these moments and try to immediately relate them to something in your own human experience that you can plug in. And that, as I said before, that you can then play very simply and very cleanly. You don't need to add all this stuff. So yeah, I guide them. You know, you asked before about contemporary playwrights. I ask them to do Miller, Williams, or Chekhov. And if they have to do contemporary, just as their first round, I asked them to do Rich Greenberg, who I think writes beautifully, or if you want to do something more, lyrically written, it's at times Sarah Rule actually tends to still really have these beautiful but sparse, but human moments that you can identify. But Miller makes it so much easier. You're sort of like, this is it. This is like the buffet of options, and then you're like, God, I'm spoiling you because you'll probably now be reading for, my husband calls all sitcoms Who Dropped the Soap, and you're going to probably be reading for Who Dropped the Soap, and you won't be able to find any really substantial human interactions. But yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Well, forgive me if this was answered because I was late. And since you mentioned Miller and Williams Chekhov, and that is what Stella Adler used to teach in her script interpretation, three of the authors, main authors, she taught her script interpretation class.
Yeah.
And when she dealt with Miller, I remember she really emphasized the social political aspects of Arthur Miller and how, she basically could take one line from a play and tell you exactly where Miller was coming from. And when I was doing it, reading Vincent and Vichy, he actually confirmed that for me.
Yeah.
So, did you, in that respect, how much does that affect you? In other words, his feelings about I know he had some negative feelings about what we should call the new big business capitalism.
Right.
The American dream and things like that.
Yeah.
All of these, Stella used to call epic ideas.
Yeah.
To what degree do you use that or teach that in your class?
Well, the thing is, like, that is an incredibly substantial way to look at the way the play works as a whole, but you can never act an idea. So I understand, as you well know, I'm sure. And so what I find difficult when I'm working is if we become so conscious of what the play is doing sort of on a social level, it becomes sometimes clouded to act it. And so, so for instance, for those of you, you sound like you really obviously know this world, but if you were to say, well, The Crucible is just, about McCarthyism, you couldn't act that, and there was no way to act that, but, or no way to effectively act that. But I do feel like, I feel like when we worked on The Price, for instance, the idea of being disempowered because you were lower middle class, and to really feel that anything you look at, societally speaking, is just slightly out of your reach, that is playable, and that is like the attempt to articulate that through the text is very playable, and class is a huge issue in this play. So yes, you start to break it down, and you start to say, this character is just eyeing whatever that purse and thinking, I can never afford that, and it fuels this discussion, which we all understand those feelings. So I hope that's a way of, yeah. So the truth that we felt we uncovered is that she committed suicide.
Oh.
And other people felt that was validated. We would talk about that a little bit.
How did you come to that?
Well, after the father says that they had no money,
Yeah.
and then they sort of discuss that the mother that she vomits when they sat down, and that she drank, and there was just I feel bad because you guys are so responsible to his, but there was I can't believe I'm forgetting, there was enough indication in the end of the text, toward the end of the play, that made us feel that it was unspeakable what had happened to her. Not that she had done something, that she probably had drunk herself to death. Right. Yeah. That she was not around at the end. Yeah, so his method, do you know about Strasberg's methodology with acting? Yeah, so it was all sense memory, and you would replay all of these things that you would have probably repressed for good reason. And his whole thing was to go back and through this series of exercises, and that his assertiveness with Marilyn in terms of, and I'm in no way, an expert on any of that story, but there was the belief from people in the group theater from both Stella and Morris, Morris Kratowski, I studied with, that Strasberg had pushed her to find more depth by going deeply into analysis and into reflections on her very, troubled past, and it caused her to medicate herself over and over again.
In the time bends,
Wow.
Paula writes extensively
Oh, did I see that?
about Paula
Oh.
being on the set of After the Fall.
Oh,
I'm sorry, the
Who's
Misfits.
The Misfits.
And her undue influence on Monroe
Oh,
during that time.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
when it was falling apart.
yeah.
That final play.
Yeah, and that final play, finishing the picture.
Yeah. So that's a fairly common
Yeah.
divisiveness within the group theater about how that method worked.
Another
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Having worked both extensively in Shakespeare and Miller, have you found similarities in the canon in rehearsal or in performance?
Oh, that's so interesting. I think that I'm reflecting on because I can only reflect on what emotionally stays with you when you're done. I was telling Jan, when I finish a play, I usually leave the text at the door. I don't, because when you're doing a play, for all of you who are actors, you repeat it in the day to yourself to keep it very alive in your mind. And when I finish a play, I avoid thinking about it. So to that end, what I remember are the relationships in the play, the way, who I gravitated to as a character and what I felt fulfilled with as a character, not the actual lines. And I have to say, in working on Shakespeare, the weight of the relationships is quite similar. You can't look at A View from the Bridge and King Lear and not understand that it is that there's a desperate need for the fulfillment of something really primal, in those plays. I don't think you can. I mean, I think it's all you're grappling with the same level of the same level of human need. And actually, interestingly, Miller and Shakespeare have little seeds of humor that are revealed to you when you really play it, as full out as possible, that I have found true in both of those, with both of those writers. Yeah. Funny. Oh,
Yeah,
I didn't see that
didn't
movie.
see
Did
it.
you see that?
I didn't see
Did you
it.
see it?
I did see that film.
What do you
I think Miller was sort of, for me, not as present or absent in that film. The focus of it was clearly on Monroe. But I thought the interesting insight to Monroe, the way it was played, was what's the actress out of my head? Michelle Williams. When Michelle Williams captured her, Monroe's, I think, unique ability to realize who she was as a person, who she was as Marilyn Monroe. There's a scene in that movie when she says to the young man, she says, people are following him, and she says, you want me to see you, I want you to see me do her. And she goes into the Marilyn Monroe character.
Oh.
It's just fabulous. And I remember Joan Copeland, Miller's sister, told me once, she said, Marilyn had a power that she knew she could just turn on like that.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
And Miller has the Maggie character do that.
Yes,
Even though it's not about
He has
Marilyn.
to do it, he has to do it in the play.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
you're right.
We cut that play a lot too.
It's a long play.
It's a very long play. It's so fascinating to me how clear he was as a thinker and how difficult it is to even articulate the ideas that he gives to us, because he gives them to us so with such laser precision, and yet we're so emotionally when you sort of understand what he's getting at, we become so emotional about those ideas that then we want to pull them back apart again. I mean, right? I mean, that's like any big idea. When someone finally makes you understand it, then you just. But yeah, I really would urge you guys to look at that documentary if you haven't seen it, because there are many things that we haven't even touched upon, father-son relationships that he gets into, that he describes sort of the connection to his son, and he's only speaking about his older son, Robert, but this sort of Zeus-like competition. He talks about relationships with an understanding of, so we're all looking at him to reflect on what he brought us, and he's looking at the Greeks and Shakespeare to see what his influences are, which was very profound to recognize. And he would speak about them in as sort of lengthy a way as as I am trying to speak about him. So it's nice to know that he struggled with someone as much as we struggle with him, if that makes sense.
And Ibsen, the Greeks and Ibsen.
Oh, and Ibsen, of course, yeah.
I got a couple of quickies, maybe. On the price, was there any discussion about what happened to the money that the father gave Walter?
Oh, no.
I mean, I was there for a talk back, and it was actually an audience member asked the question, and I was stumped. I was like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Wasn't thinking about
Walter.
Because
Walter talks about how the father had actually given him some money to invest.
Yeah, he does invest it.
So we don't. Then what happened? Walter just took that money.
Yeah, Walter did take that money. Walter lived so well. Walter did take that money. Yeah.
We bought nursing homes.
My other one was just that final speech, Alfieri in Beautiful Bridge. It always kind of stumps me. I think it's coming out of what you were just saying. It's like Miller gives you these things to think about, and you just think you're grasping towards knowledge, and then something complicates it.
Right.
And that final speech of Alfieri, where he talks about Eddie and how there's something perversely pure, the thing about Eddie knew himself, yet he doesn't. Isn't that was there any? Do you remember any sort of discussion on that one?
Most of the time we settle for half.
Yeah.
Oh,
I kind of sort of understand it from Alfie, but I don't really understand what he's saying about Eddie in that speech.
yeah, but it's really about what we spoke about for a minute, which is this truth the truth will, I don't think will set us free is not necessary.
I think Beatrice sees it, but does Eddie?
Yeah, but I think that Alfieri is speaking about how much Eddie revealed himself to Alfieri, to him, and I don't know. Yeah, I think it's more about how Alfieri was able to see him in a beautiful way, in his pain, which is what Beatrice does also. Because he says, I confess that something perversely pure calls to me from his memory. And I think that's what actually what Miller does with all of his very flawed characters. Something very pure is revealed. Look at Willie, look at all of them.
And this is his definition of tragedy, being unable to settle for half. His definition of tragedy.
Yeah, that you can't just have half. Yeah, but that those characters are pure is beautiful.
Because they're unwilling to settle.
Last question.
Yeah, I'd just like to make add an observation to piggyback on what you were saying about the use of Miller's language, the expressions that are out in the culture. This goes back probably to the 1980s. I was watching the TV series Spencer for Hire, and the Robert Urich character uses the line at the end of whatever somebody dies, a salesman exists on a smile and a shoe shine.
Yeah.
And I was so impressed. And I believe that Robert Parker had been involved, if not had written the TV scripts. And I just was so impressed that Arthur Miller's presence was in this, this cop show.
Yeah,
It's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's so wonderful.
I just met a Syrian refugee, actually, who's an actor, and he is quite well known in Syria. And I said, what did you study? I'm so curious. He said, Miller.
There we go.
Really?
Miller and Shakespeare and Chekhov and then the Arabic. Right, and I thought, wow, that's amazing.
That is
That's who he
amazing.
studied, yeah.
Well, I want to thank you,
Thank you
Jessica.
so
This was
much,
wonderful.
Jessica.